He shoved her away, calling her a delusional, grimy child. Now, his son screams in a blood-soaked bed, eaten alive from the inside by a parasite his billion-dollar doctors can't see. To save him, Harrison Vance must crawl back to the barefoot girl who holds the only cure. But in a city of millions, how do you find a ghost? Before it's too late? Welcome to our channel. We're thrilled to have you join us for this story. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is down in the comments. If you're ready for this intense journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss a single moment of what's coming next. The silence in Caleb Vance's room was a physical presence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a library or the hushed reverence of a church. It was a manufactured, clinical void. The walls were padded with acoustic foam, the triple-paned window was sealed shut, and the heavy oak door closed with the soundless finality of a bank vault. At 10 years old, Caleb didn't live in a bedroom. He existed in a soundproofed laboratory, and he was the sole, frustrating specimen. From his home office 3 floors below, Harrison Vance observed the specimen on a 4K monitor. The screen was split into 4 angles, each capturing his son's listless movements. Harrison, a man who had built an empire by quantifying data and eliminating variables, saw his son as the ultimate, unsolvable variable. He tracked Caleb's sleep patterns, his caloric intake, and his responses to auditory stimuli, all logged in a color-coded spreadsheet. It was the same meticulous approach he applied to a failing subsidiary, and it carried the same cold, impersonal weight of disappointment. A failed investment. He watched Caleb trace patterns on the thick glass of the window, a silent movie of a boy yearning for a world he couldn't properly hear. Caleb's right ear was a vacuum, a total absence of sound. His left ear offered a distorted, muffled version of reality, like listening to life through a thick wall of water. Frustration was a constant, simmering heat in his chest. He could see the birds singing in the ancient oak tree on the lawn, their beaks opening and closing, but the sound that reached him was just a faint, warbling static. Harrison's fingers flew across a keyboard, closing a multi-million-dollar deal. Without looking away from his work, he tapped out a message on his phone. The screen in Caleb's room lit up. ENT appointment at 4. Be ready. No, hello, no, how are you? Just a command. An entry on the schedule. For Harrison, love was a series of actions. Hiring the best specialists, funding experimental treatments, building this very room. He had done everything right, everything logic dictated. The lack of results was a personal affront, a glitch in his perfectly coded world. Caleb's shoulders slumped. Another appointment. More doctors shining lights into his ears, speaking to him in loud, slow voices as if he were an idiot, not just partially deaf. The anger and the suffocating silence became too much. His eyes landed on the bicycle. It was a marvel of engineering, a carbon fiber frame with disc brakes and a dozen gears he didn't know how to use. It had appeared in his room last month, a silent apology for the birthday Harrison had missed for an unavoidable business trip to Tokyo. It was a guilt gift, another expensive, useless gesture. But today it was something else. It was an escape. With a surge of adrenaline that was louder than anything he'd heard all day, Caleb made a decision. He waited until the red light on the in-room camera blinked, signaling a momentary data transfer, a 30-second blind spot Harrison had overlooked. He grabbed the bicycle, unlocked his door with a soft click he barely registered, and wheeled it down the plush-carpeted hallway. Every shadow was a threat, every floorboard a potential betrayal. He slipped out a side door used by the catering staff, the sudden rush of unfiltered air and the faint, chaotic hum of the outside world making him dizzy. He was out. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something real, a connection to a world that wasn't trying to fix him. The manicured lawns of the Vance estate bled into a public park that acted as a pristine green buffer between the world of the wealthy and the city's forgotten, grittier neighborhoods. Caleb rode with a wobbly, uncertain rhythm. The world, unfiltered by acoustic foam, was a chaotic symphony his brain struggled to process. The muted roar of traffic, the distant chatter of people, the rustle of wind in the trees, it all contributed to a sense of vertigo. His inner ear, the delicate gyroscope that governed balance, was a broken instrument. He was clumsy, a fact the specialists had noted with detached sympathy in their reports, impaired vestibular function. He took a corner too fast, the front wheel catching on a patch of loose gravel. The world tilted sideways and he went down, the scrape of metal on asphalt, a harsh shriek in his good ear. A gasp, closer than he expected, made him look up. A girl sat on a park bench, a charcoal pencil paused over a sketchbook. Her feet were bare, smudged with dirt, and her clothes looked like they'd been worn for 100 adventures. She wasn't laughing. Her eyes, a startling shade of blue, were fixed on his bicycle. "Whoa," she breathed, her voice clear and crisp, cutting through the muddle of background noise. "Is that a real carbon frame?" Caleb, used to pity or polite avoidance, was momentarily stunned. He pushed himself up, wincing as he put weight on his scraped knee. "I think so," he mumbled. "I'm Sky," she said, closing her sketchbook. She didn't offer a hand, didn't ask if he was okay. She just watched him, her gaze direct and assessing, completely devoid of the sterile compassion he hated. He brushed the gravel from his jeans. "Caleb." Her eyes drifted from the bike to him, and for the first time he felt seen. Not as a case study or a rich kid, but just as a boy. "You fall funny," she stated, not unkindly. It was a simple observation. The directness should have stung, but it didn't. It was just true. "My hearing," he found himself explaining. "It makes me dizzy." Sky tilted her head. "So the glitch isn't in your legs, it's in your ears." She hopped off the bench, circling the bike like a wolf studying its prey. "Can I try it?" The request was so bold, so normal, that Caleb agreed without a second thought. For the next hour they forgot where they came from. Sky rode with a fearless grace, her bare feet finding the pedals easily. Caleb ran alongside her, a wide, unpracticed smile on his face. The muffled world seemed to fade away, replaced by the simple joy of a shared moment. But the joy was punctuated by stumbles. As he tried to keep up, his balance failed him again and again. A sudden turn, a quick stop, each movement sent the world spinning. The first time he fell, Sky circled back, concerned. The second time she watched him get up, a thoughtful frown on her face. The third time, as he pushed himself off the grass, dizzy and disoriented, she didn't look at his scraped hands or bruised knee. She looked at his head. "It gets worse when you run, doesn't it?" she asked, her voice quiet. He nodded, ashamed. The doctors had given him exercises, therapies, but nothing worked. It was just another part of him that was broken. Sky knelt in front of him, her expression serious. "Tilt your head." "The left one." Confused, Caleb obeyed. She leaned in, her focus absolute. Unlike the doctors with their cold, metal otoscopes, she just looked. Her gaze was intense, patient, as if she were reading a story written in a language no one else could see. He could feel her warm breath on his skin, a strange and intimate sensation. "There," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Right there." He felt a chill run down his spine. She wasn't looking at his earlobe or his cheek. Her eyes were locked on something just inside the canal of his left ear. Something small and dark and wrong. In that moment, Sky wasn't just a girl in a park. She was the first person to stop analyzing his condition and simply see the cause of the glitch. A primal fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Caleb. He flinched back, but Sky's hand shot out, her grip surprisingly firm on his shoulder. "Hold still," she urged, her voice losing its playful edge, replaced by a tight, focused urgency that scared him more than any doctor's diagnosis. "Don't move. I mean it." Her eyes darted around, scanning the ground. She ignored the expensive bicycle, the manicured grass. Her focus was on the raw, untamed elements of the park. She snatched a thin, forked twig from the base of an oak tree, snapping it to the perfect length. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, muffled drum. This was wrong. No sterile gloves, no antiseptic wipes. This was something ancient and elemental. "It's okay," Sky said, though her knuckles were white as she held the twig. "I've seen this before. Just be brave for a second." Before he could protest, she was there, her other hand holding his head steady. The twig slid carefully, unervingly, into the canal of his ear. He felt a strange pressure, a sickening shift, and then a sharp, searing pain. A scream tore from his throat. It wasn't a muffled cry. It was a raw, full-throated roar of agony and shock. And he heard every bit of it. The sound was a physical blow, a high-fidelity explosion in a mind accustomed to cotton-wool silence. As Sky pulled the twig back, he saw it. A small, black, leech-like creature, no bigger than his thumbnail, was impaled on the end. It was writhing, its segmented body twisting in the sudden sunlight. A thick, dark stream of blood followed it, running down the side of his face. The world erupted. The chirp of a cricket nearby was a piercing shriek. The rustle of leaves was a deafening roar. His own ragged breathing was a hurricane in his head. The sensory overload was so intense, so violent, that he barely registered the screech of tires on the pavement just yards away. A black sedan, sleek and silent as a panther, slammed to a halt. The door flew open and Harrison Vance emerged, his face a mask of cold fury. He had been on his way to the ENT appointment, a simmering rage building when he found Caleb's room empty. Tracking his son's phone was a trivial matter. He had expected to find him at an arcade or a friend's house. He did not expect this. His eyes took in the scene with the speed of a microprocessor. His son on the ground. A grimy, barefoot street urchin standing over him. And blood. So much blood. Get away from him. Harrison's voice was a weapon, sharp and merciless. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides, scooping Caleb into his arms and spinning him away from Sky as if she were carrying a contagion. No, wait. You don't understand. Sky's voice was thin and reedy against his fury. She held up the twig, the creature still squirming on its tip. Harrison's lip curled in disgust. Vermin. I understand that you've harmed my son, he snarled, his world of order and control snapping back into place. This was an assault. A lawsuit. A problem to be ruthlessly eliminated. It was inside him, she pleaded, her blue eyes wide with a terror that wasn't for herself. It laid eggs. There are more. We have to go to my grandma now. She has a solution to kill the eggs before they hatch. Before it's too late. Harrison stared at her, the words registering as nothing more than the nonsensical babble of a delusional child. Grandma. Solution. It was the superstitious nonsense of the uneducated, the kind of folk garbage that his entire life's work was built to eradicate. It's too late for you, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. He shoved her back with one hand, a casual, dismissive gesture of immense power. She stumbled and fell, the twig flying from her grasp. He didn't give her a second glance. He carried Caleb toward the car, the boy's terrified sobs now crystal clear to Harrison's ears, each one a testament to the trauma he had just endured at the hands of this feral child. Back in the sterile, white marble bathroom of the Vance mansion, Harrison gently cleaned the blood from his son's ear. His anger was a tightly coiled thing. There would be consequences. Security would be tripled. The park would be patrolled. The girl would be found and dealt with. He finished dabbing the wound with an antiseptic cloth. The bleeding had stopped. Caleb was quiet now, his breathing still shaky. Harrison prepared himself to deliver the lecture on trust, on rules, on the dangers of the world outside their gilded cage. But then Caleb looked up. His eyes, usually clouded with the frustration of his muffled existence, were shockingly clear. He focused on his father's face, truly focused for the first time in years. Dad. The word was perfect. Not loud, not slurred, but a flawless, resonant syllable of sound. It struck Harrison with the force of a physical blow. Time stopped. He stared at his son, at the boy who had never been able to form that word properly. A slow, disbelieving smile spread across Harrison's face, eclipsing the anger completely. It was a miracle. A shock to the system, a sudden trauma, had somehow cleared the blockage. His decisive action, removing Caleb from that filthy, dangerous environment, had saved him. The girl's frantic, primitive warnings evaporated from his mind, dismissed as the irrelevant babbling they were. Modernity had won. He had won. The next 4 days were a symphony. For the first time, Caleb's world was not a frustrating puzzle of muffled sounds but a vibrant, living composition. He lay in the grass and distinguished the whistle of a robin from the chirp of a sparrow. He sat at the grand piano and for the first time, the notes he played were not just dull thuds but rich, complex tones that resonated deep in his bones. Music, once a source of frustration, was now a universe of discovery. The clear, patient voices of his tutors were no longer something to strain for. They were simply there, effortless and understandable. Harrison was triumphant. The miracle was not the hearing itself, but the validation of his methods. He had acted decisively, eliminated the threat, and trusted science and logic over primitive hysteria. The result was a perfect, undeniable success. He paraded Caleb through a series of follow-up appointments with the same specialists who had previously offered only sympathetic shrugs and exorbitant bills. They were baffled. They scanned, poked, and peered, offering convoluted theories about spontaneous auditory nerve regeneration and trauma-induced synaptic realignment. Harrison listened with a smug smile, letting them take credit. It didn't matter what they called it. He knew the truth. His way had worked. To celebrate, he filled Caleb's silent laboratory with noise. A state-of-the-art stereo system with speakers taller than Caleb. A pair of noise-canceling headphones so Caleb could experience true silence before being overwhelmed by pristine audio. A tablet loaded with every streaming service imaginable. It was a hollow, commercial celebration, a shower of expensive gifts that fundamentally missed the point. Harrison was celebrating the return of a function, not the return of his son from a lonely, silent prison. He gave Caleb things that made noise, but he didn't share in the listening. He never once thought of the girl. Or, if he did, it was with a shudder of disgust and a renewed sense of righteous conviction. The hysterical street girl with her wild stories of eggs and grandmothers was a footnote, a symbol of the chaos he had correctly and logically dismissed. His pride in ignoring Sky's warning was immense, a victory built on the dangerous foundation of his own arrogance. If you believe that dismissing people just because of their background is a recipe for disaster, hit that like button. Only those who think money makes them smarter than everyone else would refuse. The symphony ended on the fifth morning. It didn't fade out, it was butchered by a scream. Harrison was in his home gym, the rhythmic thud of his treadmill a counterpoint to the stock market tickers scrolling on a wall-mounted screen. The sound that ripped through the mansion's intercom was so raw, so filled with animalistic terror, that for a moment he didn't recognize it as human. It was a sound of pure agony. He burst into Caleb's room to find a scene from a nightmare. The pristine white sheets were soaked with blood. Caleb was thrashing, his small body convulsing as if being electrocuted. His hands weren't just covering his ears, they were clawing at them, his fingernails leaving deep, red furrows in his skin. Blood streamed from both ear canals now, thick and dark, staining the silk pillows a sickening crimson. The new stereo system sat silent in the corner, a useless monument to a victory that had just been annihilated. "Caleb!" Harrison shouted, rushing to the bed. He tried to grab his son's hands to stop him from hurting himself, but Caleb's strength was unnatural, frantic. "It's loud!" Caleb shrieked, his voice cracking with pain. "Make it stop. It's so loud." Harrison froze. The soundproofed room was a tomb of silence. There was nothing to hear. He pressed his own ear against his son's, desperate to understand. He heard nothing but Caleb's ragged, terrified breathing. But Caleb could hear it. The muffled silence that had defined his life had returned, but it was no longer an empty void. It was filled with a horrific, maddening chorus of scratching and skittering. It was the sound of 100 tiny claws scrabbling against the inside of his skull, a dry, chittering sound that was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound of something alive, something hatching in the darkness of his own head. Sky's warning had not been a delusion. It had been a prophecy. The creature she had pulled from his ear was apparent. And its eggs, left behind in the warm vascular tissue of his inner ear, had hatched. Now the offspring were burrowing, feeding, and multiplying within him. The emergency room at the city's most exclusive private hospital was a blur of calm, expensive panic. Harrison threw his money and his name around like weapons, demanding the best of everything. The best neurologists, the best infectious disease specialists, the best imaging technology on the planet. They swarmed Caleb, their faces etched with professional concern as they wheeled him into the sterile, humming core of an MRI machine. Harrison paced the waiting room, his logic battling a rising tide of primal fear. There had to be an explanation. A parasite. An aggressive, fast-acting infection. Something tangible that science could identify, isolate, and destroy. The head of neurology, a man with a polished smile and a 7-figure salary, met him with a look of profound clinical sympathy. "The scans are clear, Mr. Vance," he said, holding up a series of black and white images of Caleb's brain. "Perfectly healthy. No inflammation, no obstructions, no signs of any foreign bodies. We've run a full toxicology screen, checked for every known parasite and bacteria. There is physically nothing wrong with your son." "Then what is the noise?" Harrison demanded, his voice shaking with a rage born of helplessness. "What is the bleeding?" "He's in agony." The doctor's expression shifted subtly, from sympathy to a detached, diagnostic pity. He lowered his voice. "Mr. Vance, given the patient's history of auditory challenges and the sudden, traumatic recovery he experienced, it's not uncommon for a psychosomatic event to occur. The mind can be a powerful thing. We believe Caleb is experiencing an acute psychotic break, manifesting as auditory hallucinations." A psychotic break. The words were a clinical, condescending dismissal of the horror he had just witnessed. They were calling his son crazy. They were telling him the screams, the blood, the sheer terror were all just a fiction created by a damaged mind. Harrison stood frozen in the sterile, white corridor, the hum of the hospital's machinery a mocking echo of the silence in his son's room. His wealth, his power, his unwavering faith in a logical, quantifiable world, it was all useless. He was watching his son be eaten alive from the inside out by an invisible, internal horror, and the greatest minds his money could buy were telling him it wasn't real. The nightmare had begun, and his arrogance had locked the door behind him. For hours, Caleb was trapped in a cycle of sedatives and screams. The drugs would pull him under into a shallow, fitful sleep, his body twitching, only for him to be ripped awake again by the invisible torment in his head. Harrison sat by the hospital bed, a helpless statue of a father. He watched the lines on the heart monitor spike with each silent scream, the beeping of the machine the only proof of the agony his son was enduring. The doctors, having exhausted their playbook of scans and tests, now treated Harrison with a polite, dismissive caution, the kind reserved for the unstable parents of troubled children. The room was a monument to his failure. Every sterile surface, every expensive piece of equipment mocked him. He had built an empire on the principle that every problem had a logical, profitable solution. Now, faced with a problem that defied logic, his empire was worthless. His power was an illusion. During a rare moment of quiet, when the sedatives had finally granted Caleb a deeper peace, Harrison reached out and brushed a sweat-soaked strand of hair from his son's forehead. The boy was pale, his skin almost translucent against the white hospital pillows. He looked so fragile, so small. A wave of guilt, so potent it was physically nauseating, washed over Harrison. He hadn't just failed to protect his son. He had actively participated in his own delusion, celebrating a 4-day lie while a time bomb ticked away inside his child's head. Suddenly, Caleb's eyes shot open. They weren't wild with pain this time, but focused, lucid, and filled with a terrifying clarity. His small hand darted out, grabbing Harrison's wrist. His grip was weak, trembling, but charged with a desperate, final energy. His whisper was a dry, strained rasp, the sound of vocal cords fighting through unimaginable pain. Sky. The name struck Harrison with the force of a physical blow. It was a word from another world, the world he had so arrogantly dismissed 5 days ago. Find Sky. Caleb's eyes pleaded, tears welling and tracing clean paths through the grime of sweat and dried blood on his temples. She knew, she said, before it's too late. The memory didn't just return, it detonated in Harrison's mind. The sterile white hospital room dissolved, replaced by the sun-drenched green of the park. He saw her face, not a grimy street urchin, but a child with eyes wide with genuine terror. He heard her voice, not as hysterical babble but as a clear, desperate plea. It laid eggs. We have to go to my grandma now. She has a solution to kill them. He felt the phantom sensation of his own hand shoving her, the casual, brutal dismissal of a warning that could have saved everything. He hadn't just ignored a warning, he had scoffed at the cure. He had thrown away the only lifeline offered to him because it was handed to him by someone he deemed worthless. The weight of that arrogance, of that blind, stupid pride, came crashing down, crushing the air from his lungs. This sterile room wasn't a place of healing. It was a tomb he had built, brick by brick, with his own hubris. Harrison's world is collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance. He had the answer and threw it away. Comment, hear the truth, below if you think a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account. Let's show that trolls who worship status are in the minority. He stumbled back from the bed as if electrocuted, his chair clattering to the floor. The sound was distant, unimportant. He stared at his son, whose brief moment of lucidity was already fading, his eyes glazing over as the internal horror reclaimed him. Harrison turned and fled the room. He stood in the cold, sterile hallway, the low, constant hum of the hospital's machinery, a mocking drone that sounded like laughter. His resources, his power, his entire empire meant nothing. He had to find a ghost. He had to find a barefoot girl with no last name, no address, no digital footprint in a city of millions. And he had to do it now. Because inside his son, a parasitic brood was burrowing deeper, feeding and claiming him piece by agonizing piece. The clock wasn't just ticking. In his heart, Harrison knew he was already out of time. Harrison is about to step out of his ivory tower and into a world he despises to save his son. Hit subscribe if you believe he needs to find Sky, because only a monster would want to see a child suffer because of his father's pride. Harrison Vance did not walk, he mobilized. Fleeing the hospital, he didn't go to his son's side but to his home office, the cold, glass and steel command center from which he ran his global empire. Guilt was a poison, but panic was a motivator, and Harrison dealt with panic the only way he knew how, by throwing overwhelming force at a problem. Within an hour, the office was a war room. He brought in his top security analysts, the ruthless data miners who could find a rival's weakness in a mountain of code. He hired the city's most expensive private investigators, men who moved through the shadows with digital precision. On a massive, wall-sized screen, a digital map of the city pulsed with information. "The parameters are simple," Harrison announced, his voice tight and controlled, betraying none of the terror clawing at his insides. A girl approximately 10 to 12 years old. Name is Sky. Thin build, barefoot. Last seen in Northwood Park 5 days ago. He pulled up the security footage from the park entrance. A blurry, pixelated image of a girl with wild hair and a sketchbook. "This is our ghost. Find her." What followed was a montage of technological futility. His team ran the image through every facial recognition database they could access. City surveillance, social media, school records. The result was a cascade of failures. No match found. The girl had no digital footprint. No school records, no social security number, no Instagram account. She did not, in any official capacity, exist. The private investigators hit similar walls. They canvassed the park, but the few people who vaguely remembered seeing a girl sketching knew nothing about her. She was transient, a whisper. For 2 days, Harrison lived on black coffee and raw adrenaline, watching his billion-dollar surveillance and data network fail utterly. The system he had built to track global assets, to predict market fluctuations, to find anyone anywhere was useless. It could track a credit card swipe across continents, but it couldn't find a barefoot girl who lived entirely in the analog world. The reports came back, each one a nail in the coffin of his methodology. Subject is off-grid. No verifiable data points. A ghost. On the 3rd day, the call came from the hospital. Caleb had suffered a seizure. The doctors spoke of exploratory surgery, of managing his symptoms, their voices calm and clinical as they described the slow, agonizing surrender to an enemy they refused to name. That was the moment Harrison broke. He looked at the screens, at the useless data, at the team of expensive experts who could offer him nothing. He tore off his headset, the crackle of static a final mocking sound. He walked out of the war room, ignoring the questions from his staff. In his bedroom, he stripped off the tailored suit that served as his armor. He removed the platinum watch that measured his life in profitable seconds. He put on a pair of simple jeans and a plain, dark hoodie, clothes he hadn't worn in 20 years. He left his driver, his security detail, and the black sedan behind. For the first time since he had made his first million, Harrison Vance walked out his front door and into the city, not as a titan of industry but as a terrified father. His descent began. He started in the places his investigators had dismissed as low probability. The soup kitchens where the steam and smell of stew clung to the air. The homeless shelters where rows of cots held the city's forgotten souls. The dark, damp spaces under overpasses where makeshift communities huddled for warmth. He held up his phone, showing the grainy security cam photo of Sky to faces that were weathered, tired, and deeply suspicious. His first attempts were a disaster. He approached a woman running a soup kitchen, his voice still carrying the clipped, commanding tone of a CEO. "I'll give $5,000 to anyone who can identify this girl," he announced. The woman looked at his expensive shoes, his manicured hands, and then at the desperation he was failing to conceal. She just shook her head and turned away, serving another ladle of soup. He was an alien here, a predator, and his money was an insult, a transparent attempt to buy a piece of their world without understanding it. He spent hours walking, the concrete unforgiving on his expensive dress shoes. He was ignored, laughed at, and once told to get lost in no uncertain terms. Each rejection was a painful stripping away of his ego. His power, his name, his wealth, they were not just useless here, they were liabilities. They marked him as an outsider, a tourist in the land of genuine suffering. Defeated, he slumped onto a bus stop bench as the sun began to set, the city lights painting the sky in shades of orange and despair. He was failing. Every tick of the clock was the sound of his son slipping further away. This world operated on a different currency, one he didn't possess. He had to learn a new language. He had to learn how to be helpless. As Harrison sat on the hard plastic of the bus stop bench, a new kind of silence settled over him. It wasn't the sterile void of Caleb's room or the triumphant quiet of his boardroom. It was the heavy silence of absolute defeat. An old man, smelling faintly of rain and cheap tobacco, sat down beside him, his joints cracking in protest. He glanced at the phone still clutched in Harrison's hand, the blurry image of sky glowing in the twilight. "Looking for a runaway?" the old man rasped, his voice like gravel. Harrison, stripped of his arrogance, didn't have the energy to lie. "My son, he's sick. She's the only one who can help him." He didn't expect a response, but the old man squinted at the photo. "Don't know her face," he said, "but I know the art." He pointed a gnarled finger at the corner of the image, where the edge of Sky's sketchbook was visible. The lines were bold, swirling, full of a life that Harrison's pixelated photo couldn't capture. "That's Riverbend work. The kids over in the bend, they draw on everything. Walls, sidewalks themselves. Got a style to 'em. You won't find her in a shelter. The Riverbend folk, they look after their own." A flicker of hope, painful and foreign, sparked in Harrison's chest. Riverbend. It wasn't a district on any official map. It was a forgotten industrial zone down by the polluted river, a self-contained community of squatters and outcasts who lived in the husks of abandoned warehouses. A place his investigators had deemed a complete dead end. He took a cab as far as it would go and then he walked. The transition was jarring. The gleaming glass towers of the city gave way to crumbling brick and rusted steel. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. This wasn't just a different neighborhood, it was a different world, one that ran on its own rules. Here his name meant nothing. He found the community garden by following the vibrant splashes of color. Murals of fantastical beasts and swirling galaxies were painted on the brick walls, a riot of life against the urban decay. And there, in the center of a small plot of land, tending to a row of herbs that shimmered with an almost unnatural vitality, was Sky. She saw him coming. Her body tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for a small gardening trowel, ready to use it as a weapon. Harrison stopped a dozen feet away, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. The command was gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, ragged plea. "Please," he began, the word catching in his throat. "My son. Kill. The eggs have hatched. He's dying." Sky's defensive posture softened, replaced by a look of profound sorrow and a flicker of anger. "I tried to warn you," she whispered. "I know," Harrison said, the admission of physical pain. "I was a fool. I was arrogant. Please, is there anything, your grandmother? Can you help him?" She studied his face for a long moment, searching for the man who had shoved her, who had looked at her like she was vermin. He was gone. In his place was just a terrified, broken father. With a small, reluctant nod, she led him away from the garden, through a maze of narrow alleyways, and into a run-down tenement building. The apartment was small but immaculately clean, filled with the scent of drying herbs and beeswax. An old woman sat in a rocking chair by the window, her hands methodically stripping leaves from a stalk into a clay bowl. She had Sky's piercing blue eyes, but hers were magnified by a lifetime of seeing things others refused to. This was Elena. She didn't look up as they entered. "You have the stink of pride and fear on you, Harrison Vance," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "It is a foul combination." He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, but she cut him off. "I know why you are here. My granddaughter told me of the boy with the silent sickness. The sonus vermis." She finally looked at him, her gaze so intense it felt like it was excavating his soul. "The men you worship in your clean, white rooms, they would not understand this creature. It is ancient. A parasite not of the flesh but of the vibration. It is drawn to imperfections in sound, to the unique silence your boy carried within him. It turns that silence into a breeding ground. She gestured to a dark, viscous liquid in a sealed clay pot on a nearby table. The solution is here. It is made from herbs that grow only in silence, that know how to fight this specific emptiness. It will kill them. But their death will be a storm inside your son. Elena's knowledge was dismissed as folklore, just like Sky's warning. The system of experts would rather let a child suffer than admit they don't have all the answers. If you're tired of gatekeepers who hoard knowledge and look down on others, comment "break the gates." "I'll pay anything," Harrison said, the old reflex dying hard. Elena let out a short, harsh laugh. "Your money is worthless paper here. It cannot buy what is required. The solution is poison. As it kills the brood, they will flood your son's body with a pain your mind cannot comprehend. It will try to tear his soul from his body. To survive such an ordeal, he needs an anchor. A surge of life force, a will stronger than his own, to hold him to this world." "What do you need?" Harrison asked, his voice trembling. "A donor? A machine?" Elena's eyes narrowed. "I need you. You are his father. Your life force is linked. You will be his anchor." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper. "During the ritual you will be connected to him. Not with wires or machines but in spirit. You will feel what he feels. A portion of his agony will become your own. You have spent his entire life observing his suffering from a distance. The price for his life is that you must now truly share it. You must prove you are willing to walk through the fire with him, not just pay someone else to put it out." The room was silent save for the gentle creak of the rocking chair. Harrison stared at the dark liquid in the pot, then at the unwavering gaze of the old woman. A choice. He could take his son back to the hospital, to the clean, sterile, painless descent into madness and death. Or he could face an unimaginable, shared agony, with no guarantee of success, based on the words of a woman who represented everything his logical world despised. Harrison has a choice: face unimaginable pain or walk away. Hit that like button if you believe a true parent would walk through fire for their child. Let's see who really understands sacrifice. There was no choice. Not anymore. The illusion of options, of control, of a world governed by logic and predictable outcomes, had been burned away. There was only this room, this woman, and the terrifying, unconditional love for a son he had almost lost to his own pride. "I'll do it," Harrison said, his voice a hoarse whisper, but the words were heavier and more real than any contract he had ever signed. They brought Caleb in the dead of night. Harrison signed him out of the hospital against medical advice, an act of rebellion that felt like the first truly sane thing he had done in a week. He carried his son's frail, semi-conscious body into Elena's small apartment, a world away from the beeping machines and sterile white walls. Here, the only light came from a dozen beeswax candles that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of burning sage and something else, something earthy and ancient. Elena had cleared the center of the room. A simple woven mat lay on the floor. She instructed Harrison to lay Caleb down gently, then to sit cross-legged, facing him. "Give me your hands," she commanded. He obeyed, and she placed Caleb's small, limp hands into his own. "Hold on to him. Not just his hands. His life. You are the lighthouse. No matter how violent the storm becomes, you must not let your light go out. If you do, he will be lost in the darkness forever." Sky, her face pale with worry, knelt beside her grandmother. She held the clay pot containing the dark, steaming solution. It smelled of damp earth, crushed herbs, and something metallic like blood. Elena used a wooden dropper to draw up the viscous liquid. "This will be quick," she said, her eyes locked on Harrison. "But it will feel like an eternity. Do not let go." She administered the first drop into Caleb's right ear. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the link was forged. It wasn't a gentle connection. It was a violent, psychic collision. Harrison's world didn't explode into pain. It was utterly and completely replaced by it. One second he was Harrison Vance, a man in a room. The next he was the agony. He felt 1,000 tiny needle-sharp legs scrabbling against the inside of his skull. A white-hot, searing fire tore through his auditory nerves. It was the pain Caleb had been enduring for days, but condensed, amplified, and delivered in a single brutal wave. And the sound. It was worse than any physical pain. A high-pitched, chittering shriek that was both a noise and a feeling, a vibration of pure malevolence that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his bones, in his teeth, in the very marrow of his soul. It was the sound of a hungry, thriving evil. With the sound came the emotion, a tidal wave of Caleb's terror, his helpless despair, the suffocating feeling of being consumed from the inside out. A scream built in Harrison's throat, a primal urge to rip his hands away, to flee, to make it stop. But then, through the storm of shared agony, he felt something else, the faint, flickering pulse of his son's life force, a tiny flame about to be extinguished. He saw Elena's unwavering eyes across the room. "You are the lighthouse." He held on. He clenched his teeth until his jaw ached, the scream turning into a low, guttural groan. He poured all of his will, all of his focus into his hands, trying to send a message through his grip. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. You are not alone." Elena administered the second drop, this time into the left ear. The storm intensified tenfold. The chittering rose to a deafening, mind-shattering crescendo. The pain was no longer a fire, it was a supernova, obliterating all thought, all sense of self. Harrison's vision went black. He was no longer in the room. He was adrift in an ocean of torment, the psychic screams of the dying parasites his only reality. He felt them clawing, burrowing, fighting their extinction with a final, desperate fury. He was losing his grip, his consciousness fraying. He was failing. But just as the darkness threatened to swallow him whole, a single clear image broke through the chaos. Caleb as a small boy, pressing his ear to his father's chest, trying to feel the vibration of a voice he couldn't hear. The memory was a shot of pure, unadulterated love, a force more powerful than the pain. "I've got you, son," he whispered, the words a ragged gasp, inaudible to anyone but himself. "I'm right here. I'm not letting go." He fought back. Not with anger or strength, but with love. He focused on that memory, on every good moment they had ever shared, using them to build a wall against the pain. It was a violent, terrifying exorcism, a battle fought not with technology or money, but with the raw, desperate endurance of a father's love finally, truly expressed. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The pain vanished. The noise ceased. All that remained was a profound, echoing silence. Deeper and more absolute than any silence he had ever known. Harrison's eyes fluttered open. The candlelight swam back into focus. He was still in the room, his body drenched in sweat, his hands still clutching his son's. He looked down. Caleb was limp, his face ashen, his chest still. For one terrifying, heart-stopping moment, Harrison thought the silence was death. The heart-stopping silence stretched for an eternity. Then a shudder ran through Caleb's small frame. His chest rose with a deep, gasping breath. The sound was a thunderclap in the quiet room. Caleb's eyelids fluttered open. The terror that had haunted them for days was gone, replaced by a weary, peaceful calm. He looked at his father, his focus clear. "Dad?" he whispered, his voice weak but perfect. "It's quiet." Relief washed over Harrison so powerfully his legs gave out, and he slumped forward, his head resting on their joined hands, tears of gratitude and exhaustion carving paths through the grime on his face. The parasites were gone. Caleb was safe. But as the adrenaline faded, Harrison noticed something new. A sound that wasn't a sound. A faint, persistent, low-frequency hum in his own ears. It was the ghost of a vibration, the echo of the absolute silence Caleb had once known. The psychic link, Elena explained as the dawn light filtered through the window, had left a permanent scar. A reminder. Months later, the Vance Foundation cut the ribbon on the Elena Rivera Community Health Clinic in the heart of Riverbend. Harrison wasn't at the podium in a suit. He was in the background, a tool belt slung around his waist, his hands calloused from helping to raise the walls. He didn't just write a check. He invested himself, his time, his sweat. He learned the names of the people, listened to their stories, and traded his boardroom authority for a hammer and a shared sense of purpose. The final scene isn't in a sterile room or a gleaming office. It's in Northwood Park. Caleb, healthy and vibrant, is chasing a soccer ball with Sky, their laughter echoing through the trees. Harrison sits on the bench, not looking at his phone but watching them. Listening. The phantom hum is still there, a constant companion. It's not a punishment. It's a compass, a permanent reminder of the price of arrogance and the true meaning of sacrifice. It's the sound that ensures he will never stop listening again. Harrison Vance destroyed a system of arrogance, starting with himself. He learned that listening is more powerful than commanding. If you stand against the pride and greed that allows suffering to continue, hit subscribe. Make a choice to be part of the solution, not the problem.